So I feel like in general, people are pretty considerate of each other's feelings, often to a fault. Uh, People aren't usually critical enough when we're in like a familiar environment. So I agree with the quote. You can tell more about a person by what he says about others than you can by what others say about him. And I have three examples from relationships in class and at work. So I read like a poll that was done online a couple weeks ago that said, what are some of the major turnoffs on a first date from, whether you continue dating the person or you end it. And one of the main things was how they treat the waiting staff on the first date. If people are rude or overly abrasive to the wait staff, their dates usually don't follow through with them, and it's usually just pretty rude to treat someone whose job is to serve you, and just taking advantage of them or trying to just show your power over them in a certain way. Another example was with this class. We have the peer evaluations right after the speeches that we do, and I feel like a lot of times we're really nice to each other. As soon as someone gives a speech, we'll comment on what they have to say, and almost everyone always ends with, "Yeah, but I think he did a good job overall," or "but it was okay," instead of just telling them the truth. And then with work, I once had two friends, one of which was applying for a job at a library, and they used the other friend as a reference of a character. So the person applying for the job isn't necessarily a bad person, but I know for a fact they don't enjoy, getting working with kids very much. But during the interview process when they called the second friend, they told them, they work well with kids. They're really helpful. They like volunteering. A lot of good things that they just assumed the job would like to hear. And I feel like a lot of us do that. If our friend relies on us, we won't necessarily always be honest. We'll just say what we think is the best to say in that situation, to not hurt anyone's feelings or just to help our friends out in general. So that's why I agree. You can tell more about a person by what he says about others than you can by what others say about him. Because I feel like when we have, when we see people, we're often not as critical of them as we are in our minds. And unless we're really close with someone, we don't usually get extremely honest with their flaws because we don't always feel comfortable with them.
All right, I thought your point of view was clear. Everything was set up well at the beginning of the speech. There's a preview, there's a structure, it's easy to follow. We know where you're headed. You have a nice, excellent first example that you're going to talk about, and that worked really well, and it gets you started off effectively during the presentation. Maybe the third example isn't quite as strongly developed as the initial ones were, but it was solid also. It makes your point pretty well. Presentation issues, there's lots of variety in your voice. You're usually fluid. I noticed in the end that there are a few ums. I think maybe that probably occurred more often in the second half of the presentation than the first, because I think your examples are not as detailed and you're not quite sure where you're going with them. There wasn't an excessive amount, but it is something that's noticeable, and maybe you can, again, watch your own video and see if you notice the same thing that I'm noticing there. Your eye contact with the audience is very solid. Your gestures are good. You probably want to get the topic out of your hand because you have a tendency to kind of keep looking at it and shifting it from one hand to the other, and you don't need it. You know what it is you're saying. So once you've got it and you've told us what it is, stick it in your pocket, put it down on the desk. If you need to go back to it at the end to remind us about what it is you were going to say and make sure that you get the quote back, you can pick it up again if you need to. That piece of paper just becomes something that's a distraction to you a little bit, and it becomes a distraction to us also. Still doing a little bit of the weight shifting more than you want to. It's not excessive per se, but it is noticeable, and you want it to be more purposeful. Otherwise, everything is really solid. Thank you.